everyone, welcome back to the Faithful Ewe YouTube channel. My name's Hazel. This is a spinning, weaving, knitting and hand dyeing podcast from Mid Wales in the United Kingdom. Today I thought I would do something different and do a beginner's knitting course. I've already released a full version of this video, but I thought if there was things in that you didn't particularly take your interest, I thought that I would split it up into sections. So what I've done is I've done a short video about beginners knitting using needles and wool and what you would need to buy and how you can acquire them, and in this section I thought I would do knitting notions, and then in the next section I'm going to discuss needles a bit more in depth. So today I just thought I would discuss with you about all the knitting notions that I have in my little arsenal, in my little kit that I use on a regular basis when I'm knitting. That includes stitch markers, scissors, tape measures, needle sizer. There's many different things in there, and I just thought that I would go through them with you today. Yeah, so let's get started with the video and let's get looking at seeing what's in my little bag that I use for my knitting on a regular basis. As you progress in your knitting journey or experience, hobby, whatever you want to call it, there are other things that will help you with your knitting, that will help you to be able to pick your knitting up and put it down. Yeah, I will just go through a few of those things with you now. I have my little bag here, in my little Cath Kidston bag, of what's called notions. I keep stitch markers in here, I keep my tape measure in here, I keep my scissors in here. Yeah, I keep a lot of my things that I need to hand in one place by the side of my chair or under the coffee table. So when I'm knitting of an evening, it's easy for me to grab a hold of the things that I need, and they're all to hand in one place so nothing gets lost. So yeah, there's a thing called stitch markers which are very handy, because if you're changing colours when you're knitting a scarf or a jumper or you're doing colour work, you need to be able to keep a note of where you're up to in the pattern. And sometimes a pattern will tell you to knit 20 rows in stocking stitch before you go on to the next thing, say for example. So what you would do is you would put your little stitch marker, this is called a stitch marker, it's like a little safety pin. You would put that on your jumper, say this is my knitting, let me think, have I? Yeah, say this is my knitting, you put it through the stitch, like so, and then you can keep a count of where you're up to before you have to do anything else, or where you're down to in the pattern. So that's just a really useful tool to keep a note of where you're up to in the pattern without having to try and memorise everything. Just this little simple stitch holder, simple safety pin, will save you a lot of anguish of rereading the pattern 10 million times to try and find out where you were up to the night before or 10 weeks ago, and yet you can just easily say, there's the stitch marker, count back how many rows you've done, and then you'll know how many rows you've got left to do. And for me that's so invaluable, because I can knit something and take a year to knit it. I have a shawl scarf on the go at the moment, and I've been knitting that for 2 years. Now if I didn't have one of these, I would have to undo that pattern every single time I went back to that pattern to try and find out where I was up to, because sometimes a pattern for me it's just something that's going to take a long time to knit because of how my brain works. It has a lace design in it, it has bumps in it, and yeah, it's just every section is like 22 rows, and then you go onto it and do it again and do it again. And if I didn't have one of these, I'd just get lost. I wouldn't know where I was going. So yeah, I keep them in my little handy tin, and that just keeps them all together. And then that goes in that little bag. You can get different types. These are ones I make, and I sell in my Etsy shop. This one's called a Progress Keeper. I don't know whether you can see him. There's a little sheep, and he's got glass beads on, and I sell these in my Etsy shop. I also do them as little gadgets, little dangly things to put on your scissors. So yeah, that's a Progress Keeper. That will do the same thing as that little plastic one, as this one. You can use it for exactly the same thing, to mark off where you're up to in your knitting, put that on, and then use that to keep a marker as to where you're at with the pattern. That's got a little hook on it on the end, like a little keyring clasp, necklace clasp on the end. So that's that. These ones are stitch markers. Again, these are in my Etsy shop. I make these myself. They're made of glass beads and a little tiny toadstool on the bottom. They come in sets of 4 in my shop, but you can buy them anywhere. You don't necessarily have to have mine. But yeah, again, these are very, very handy. I use them when I'm doing knitting in the round, when I'm knitting a jumper, and that just will mark the beginning of the round, so I know that every time I come back to that, that is the beginning of another row. Because when you're knitting back to front, you know where you're up to, but when you're knitting in the round, you don't have that division of rows like you do knitting back and front, back and front, back and front. So yeah, these little gadgets are extremely handy, so I use those as well. Another thing that you'll need is a sewing up needle, because if you're making a jumper in pieces, you will need to be able to have a needle that's big enough to thread the wool through to be able to sew it up into a garment. So I would recommend one of these. You can get them in metal and you can get them in plastic. I've got both. I prefer the plastic because they're a bit easier. The metal ones, just there. So I prefer the plastic, this one, but you can get the metal as well. And they come in a 2-pack in the wool shop for about £1.50, I think. These ones are pony needle, knitting up needles, and they're actually called knitter's needles as well, so they're very handy. So again, I keep them in my in my tin. Another thing that you'll need is a row counter, because if you're going to be knitting backwards and forwards, it's handy to have a row counter. And what you do with that is, it's a little gadget like that, which has numbers on it, and these little white things here are what turns the dial so that you can mark it every row. And this goes on your needle all the way to the end of the needle like that, and then you've always got it, whatever you're doing, you've always got that row counter on the end of your needle. I found these very useful when I was beginning to knit, when I used to knit backwards and forwards in a pattern. I don't tend to do that anymore because I don't like the sewing up, I'm just lazy. So I tend to look at patterns where it's knitting the round, knitting one piece, or the only thing you have to do is sew up under the arms like this cardigan was, and I'm just lazy. I just don't like sewing in all the ends and trying to make sure that it's all sewn up properly. Maybe it's something that I should learn to do properly, and then maybe I could knit more things in pieces. But yeah, this is a useful little gadget here. Whatever you're knitting, you do really need a row counter. And as I say, that just slides onto the needle. You can get them in, this one is I think it's 2.5mm up to a 5mm, and then there's another size which I haven't got to hand at the moment, and that's a 5.5 up to an 8, I think. And they come in a 2-pack, and they're about £1, £1.50, so they're not expensive. You can get them in the pound shop as well, so I keep them in my other tin, which is slightly bigger. These ones are really cute. These ones are Emma Ball, and I love these. I've got little sheep on. So they're Emma Ball, and so is my other one. This other one's got puffins on it. So there's no excuse, I always know what's in each tin. This is my small stitch markers, the other one is my beaded stitch markers. So yeah, they're from Emma Ball. If you look online you'll be able to find them, and they were relatively inexpensive, but you don't have to design these tins. You can put them in a biscuit tin, you can put them in an old tobacco tin, any kind of box, plastic box, whatever you find most useful to keep them in. It's just useful to have everything in one place. Now I've got this little pouch here, which I got off my mum for Christmas, again with sheep on. Bit of a theme going really. And this one keeps my row counter in. I got this as a freebie off one of the knitting magazines. I think it was off Simply Knitting. And it has a little dial on that side and on that side, and that turns the numbers. It's also got a little stopwatch type button on the top, which you just click when you're knitting. I don't know whether you can see the numbers going around there, which is very useful. So if you're doing, say, you've got to knit another 40 rows to get to the end before you do the rib on a pattern, you can just use one of these and that just clicks it. And when you're knitting in the round, you're not able to put one of those other row counters on your needle because it just be in the way. It's just not useful at all. But this one here is very useful. So yeah, I'd recommend one of these. I think you can get these on eBay for about £1.50, so they're not expensive. So I keep that in there. I also keep in this one a tape measure, because everyone needs a tape measure. Even if you're knitting a scarf, you need a tape measure so you can work out how long it is and how long you're wanting to make your scarf. So yeah, they're very useful. I also keep a little pair of scissors in case I need to change balls of wool, and acrylic's not easy to snap at all. It's you can't snap it, you'll hurt your hands. So a little pair of scissors like this is very useful. The other thing I have is a little tiny set of crochet hooks. Again, I think I got this off a knitting magazine. These. And I use these for catching, if there's a piece of thread that's on the outside of the jumper when I finished it, these are very useful just to pull that thread through, to poke it back through. So I keep them in this little purse here, this one. Now, I don't know who this is by, so I'm sorry I can't say where you get this from, but I got this off my mum, so I think she bought it in a garden centre locally or something. So they all go in there, and then I know where they are. Another useful thing you can also have is like a sewing kit. They've got my little progress keepers on them, on my scissors, you can see. And all this has is a little set of embroidery scissors. If you haven't got a purse and this is all you've got, then it's very useful. But they're my embroidery scissors with my little progress keepers on the end. Now they have a bigger hook, a bigger clasp on them so that it goes over the scissors. But yeah, they're a really good useful tool to have. So they go in there. It's also got a tape measure in there, and it's also got a little zip as well with some knitting up needles in again. So yeah, that's a very useful thing to have. That's just a needlework pouch. I think that was a Cath Kidston. I think I got that in Cath Kidston a few years ago in Liverpool. Can't remember now. Another useful thing would be some stitch holders. Now these are useful when you're knitting in pieces and you need to keep hold of the stitches on the neckband for picking up the neckband when you finish the jumper. Or sometimes it'll tell you to hold stitches on a needle when you're knitting in the round under the arm, like this one did, and I think the Magnolia one did as well. And these are very useful. You can get them in different sizes. There's three or four different sizes. See? This middle one I think was a pony one. I think it was about 50p. Get them in charity shops when people are having a clear out, or the older ladies die. They tend to have these in the charity shops. And then there's these ones as well, which are from China. And they come in different sizes as well. And I've seen these in the pound shop in a set of 3 or 4, and they're £1. So they're relatively inexpensive. So that's it in my little bag. As I say, you can keep a lot in a small space. I also keep my crochet hooks in here as well, my set of crochet hooks. So I've always got them to hand, I always know where they are. So all that goes back in there. I'll put them away and then I won't lose them. So they go back in there. My tins as well. So as you can see, that's quite a full bag. But yeah, I do like my toadstools, and I've got a dress in this as well. So yeah, that's my Craft Kits and Notions bag. Very useful. Always have it to hand. Always have it nearby. So when I'm knitting, I haven't got to go searching around the house for different things. Yeah, the next thing which I really love is my yarn bowl. Now these are very handy because if you're knitting something like which is small, like a scarf or a hat or something, you can keep it all in here, keep all the colours in here like this. So that's my wool that I'm using for my hat. You can keep it all in there like this, and there's a little swirl here for your wool to go through, and 2 little holes next to that for your needles to go through. So take them out. Now if you're knitting with your wool, you can leave the wool in the bowl, you thread it through like that, and then you can use it like that while you're knitting, and your wool stays within the bowl, not rolling around all over the place, and it's just really easy to keep everything together. Then when you've finished, take your needle and you can pop it through the hole like that. And that's just a really useful way to keep all your knitting together, keep it tidy, pop it on the bookcase, on the table, whatever, keeps your wool all in one place, and all you've got to do then is just go and get your bowl, pick your knitting up, and you're away, and it looks tidy. I wouldn't recommend one of these for a big project like a jumper or a cardigan or something, but they're very useful when you're knitting a hat and you're knitting with colour work and you want to keep all your colours together. It's just really easy to keep it in there, pick it up, start knitting, put it back down, and it's always there when you want it, and it's always to hand. So highly recommend one of those. I bought mine on eBay and I think it was about £12, something like that. And it is wool, wood, 100% wood, no plastic. It's all nice and fashioned. So yeah, I would highly recommend one of those. So that's that. Gadget for you is, you just get this thing. It's called a needle sizer. Now if you're like me and you own a lot of needles, sometimes it rubs off what size they are, and you can't really guess, or if you're going to a charity shop you'll often find they're in old sizes, before what came to millimetres. So one of these, this one is a size 8, you pop it through, and you continue to pop it through like that until you find the right size. Now that one says it's an 8, but it's actually 4 or a 4.5 mil. Excuse me, it's actually a 4 or a 4.5 millimetre. So you just go round the dial like that until you find the right size. As you can see, that one's too big, that one's too big, that one is quite tight, so I would say that was a 4 mil, like that. Now again, I got this on eBay and it was about £1.50, and I just keep that over there. I've also got one which was free with one of the knitting magazines in there, and that does exactly the same thing. Right, so I think that's it for today. I can't think of anything else that I want to show you. We've gone through quite a lot there, but as you can see, it's relatively cheap to build up your knitting kit, so that you can knit all sorts of different items, whether it be scarves, jumpers, hats, cowls, whatever you decide to learn to knit with. All these little items, all these little gadgets, what I call knitting gadgets, will help you just to be able to knit a bit more efficiently, really. I mean, the row counters will help you to know where you're up to in your knitting. The stitch markers will help you to know where you're up to with your knitting. And they're all really just little tiny helps along the way, just so you can do your knitting a bit more efficiently, and also maybe help you learn different techniques as well, and maybe they won't be so daunting to you. So yeah, I think that's it for today with regards to the knitting notions. If you do want to get in touch with me, please feel free to leave a comment below, or you can find me on Instagram, Facebook and Pinterest. You can also find me on my website as well, and all the links for those things are in the description box below. But But do feel free to get in touch with me, anything at all. If there's any question, nothing too big, nothing too small, I'll be happy to help you in any way that I can. So I think that's it for today. If you do want to watch the rest in the series, there is another couple of short videos, as I say. One to do with beginners knitting needles and wool, what you would need to buy, what you can look for. The next one is about knitting needles, and there's also a full version as well, which is about 50 minutes long if you want to watch the whole video that I did on that as well. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen today, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Bye.